The morning sun beat down on the naval training facility as Rachel Vale pulled her weathered sedan into the visitor parking area. At 33, she had the kind of quiet presence that made people look right through her average height, shoulder length. Brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing a faded denim jacket and sunglasses that had seen better days. She moved with an economy of motion that suggested military training, but nothing about her screamed, "Pay attention to me." She was here for one reason: to watch her younger brother Tommy complete his first sniper qualification test. The kid had been dreaming about becoming a SEAL since he was 12, and today would determine if those dreams had any foundation in reality. Rachel had driven 4 hours from her quiet apartment in Sacramento, taking a personal day from her job at the insurance office, because she knew Tommy would be nervous. He always had been, ever since they were kids. The training facility buzzed with activity. Recruits in desert camouflage moved between stations, their faces serious and focused. The air smelled of gunpowder and determination. Rachel found a spot near the designated observation area, a simple metal barrier that separated the active training zone from the small section, where family members were occasionally allowed to watch. She settled onto a concrete bench, hands folded in her lap, and scanned the field until she spotted Tommy. Even from a distance, she could see his hands shaking as he attempted to set up the massive Barrett rifle. Her heart clenched watching him struggle with the bipod, dropping it twice before finally getting it positioned. The instructors were clearly losing patience. "This is a training area, not a tourist zone," barked Lieutenant Marcus Webb, a broad-shouldered man with steel-gray eyes who had been watching Rachel since she arrived. He approached with the swagger of someone who enjoyed reminding people of their place. "Ma'am, you need to understand that civilian observation is only allowed during designated public demonstrations. This is active training." Rachel looked up at him calmly. "I understand. I'm just here for my brother. He's nervous about his first qualification test." Lieutenant Webb's expression remained skeptical. "Which recruit is your brother?" "Tommy Vale. He's the one with the shaky hands on the Barrett." Webb glanced over at the young man who was now fumbling with the weapon set up for the third time. A few nearby recruits had started to notice, and Rachel could see the embarrassment creeping across Tommy's face. "Yeah, well, maybe you should. Wait in the parking lot. He needs to focus." "Of course," Rachel replied softly, but she didn't move. She just continued watching as her brother's confidence crumbled with each mistake. That's when the comments started. "These family members always think they can just show up and watch," Sergeant Rodriguez said to another instructor, his voice carrying just loud enough for Rachel to hear. "This isn't a little league game." "Right," agreed recruit Peterson, a cocky kid from Texas who'd been making jokes all morning. "My sister tried the same thing. Had to tell her this is serious business, not entertainment." Rachel's jaw tightened slightly, but she maintained her composure. She'd heard worse than casual dismissal before, and she knew how to handle it. What concerned her more was watching Tommy's performance deteriorate as the pressure mounted. "Look at that lady," Peterson whispered to his buddy, loud enough for Rachel to hear. "Probably thinks she's in a movie, watching SEAL teams train like those TikTok videos." The other recruits snickered. One of them added, "Bet she's here trying to get Instagram photos with real SEALs." Rachel didn't react. She simply adjusted her position on the bench, pulled her jacket a little tighter, and kept her eyes on Tommy. But inside, something was stirring, a familiar mixture of patience and steel that had once made her very dangerous indeed. When Tommy dropped the bipod for the fourth time, she could see him glance desperately in her direction. It was the same look he'd given her when he was 8 years old and couldn't figure out how to ride his bike. The same look that had made her spend countless hours in their backyard, running alongside him until he found his balance. "Ma'am." Lieutenant Webb's voice had taken on a harder edge. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. You're becoming a distraction." Rachel looked up at him, her brown eyes steady behind her sunglasses. "I'm not talking to anyone. I'm just standing here. Your presence is affecting the recruit's performance. He keeps looking over here instead of focusing on his weapon." Rachel could feel the eyes of the other instructors and recruits on her. She could sense their assumption that she was just another worried family member who didn't understand the seriousness of military training. They saw a quiet woman in civilian clothes who had no business being there. If only they knew what was hidden beneath that faded denim jacket. "I understand your concern," Rachel said quietly, standing up from the bench, "but I'm not going anywhere. My brother needs to know that someone believes in him." Lieutenant Webb's face reddened. "Ma'am, this is not a request. You need to leave the premises immediately, or I'll have security escort you out." Rachel removed her sunglasses, revealing eyes that had seen things these young recruits couldn't. "Imagine. I'll move back further if it helps. But I'm staying." The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Several recruits had stopped what they were doing to watch the confrontation. Tommy had frozen completely, his hands still shaking as he stared at his sister facing down the lieutenant. What none of them realized was that Rachel Vale had faced down much worse than an angry training instructor. And hidden beneath her sleeve was a small tattoo that would change everything once it was revealed. But that revelation was still coming. The standoff between Rachel and Lieutenant Webb had drawn the attention of half the training facility. Recruits pretended to focus on their weapons while stealing glances at the quiet woman who had refused to back down. The morning sun climbed higher, casting harsh shadows across the training ground as the tension escalated. "Ma'am, you have exactly 60 seconds to gather your things and leave," Webb announced, his voice carrying across the field. "After that, I'm calling security." Rachel stood her ground, hands still folded calmly in front of her. "I'm not causing any disruption. I'm simply observing from the designated area." "The designated area is for authorized family members during scheduled demonstrations," Webb shot back. "This is an active qualification test, which makes it even more important that I stay," Rachel replied quietly. "My brother has been preparing for this day for months." Sergeant Rodriguez had moved closer, flanking Webb like backup in what was clearly becoming a power play. "Lady, you don't seem to understand. This isn't about what you want. This is about military protocol." The comment stung because it revealed exactly what they thought of her, just another civilian who didn't understand how the real world worked. Rachel had heard variations of this dismissal before, but never from people who had no idea what she'd sacrificed for that very protocol they were hiding behind. Tommy's performance was deteriorating rapidly. His hands shook so badly now that he couldn't even properly grip the rifle. The other recruits were starting to notice, and their barely concealed smirks made Rachel's protective instincts flare. "Your brother's falling apart," Peterson whispered to his buddy. Maybe his sister should have stayed home and baked cookies instead. The casual cruelty of the comment hit Rachel like a physical blow. She'd driven 4 hours to be here, taken time off work, and faced down these condescending instructors, all so Tommy would know he wasn't alone. And now she was being treated like some kind of helicopter parent who didn't understand boundaries. 60 seconds is up, Webb announced. "Rodriguez, call security." "Wait," Rachel said, her voice still calm but carrying a new edge. "I have a right to be here. I'm not interfering with any training." "You have no rights here," Webb replied coldly. "This is a military installation. You follow our rules or you leave." Rachel felt the familiar burn of injustice, the same feeling she'd experienced in a dozen different situations where people in power had abused that power simply because they could. She'd learned long ago that fighting back openly rarely worked. But she'd also learned that sometimes you had to stand your ground, even when the odds were stacked against you. I understand your position, Rachel said carefully. But I'm not leaving until my brother completes his test. Webb's face darkened. Then you'll be leaving in handcuffs. That's when everything changed. As Webb stepped closer, clearly intending to intimidate her into backing down, Rachel instinctively shifted her weight. The movement was subtle but unmistakable to anyone who knew what to look for. The stance of someone who had been trained to handle physical confrontation. Her jacket shifted slightly, and for just a moment, the edge of something dark was visible. On her forearm, a tattoo. Most of the recruits didn't notice, but Sergeant Rodriguez did. His eyes narrowed as he tried to get a better look, but Rachel's jacket had already fallen back into place. "Ma'am," Rodriguez said, his tone slightly different now. "Have you served?" Rachel's eyes flicked to him. "That's not relevant to this situation." "It might be," Rodriguez pressed. "What branch?" "Sergeant, that's enough," Webb interrupted. "Call security." Now, but Rodriguez hesitated. Something about Rachel's posture, the way she carried herself, the complete lack of fear in her eyes, it all suggested military training. And if she was a veteran, kicking her off the base for wanting to watch her brother's test would be a public relations nightmare. "Maybe we should just let her stay," Rodriguez suggested quietly. "She's not actually disrupting anything." Webb's jaw tightened. "I said call security." Rachel watched the exchange with growing interest. She could see the doubt creeping into Rodriguez's mind, the recognition that maybe they were making a mistake. But Webb was clearly someone who couldn't back down once he'd taken a position. "I'll make you a deal," Rachel said suddenly. "If Tommy fails his test, I'll leave immediately and never come back. If he passes, you let me watch the rest of the training day without any more harassment." Webb laughed harshly. "Your brother's not going to pass anything. Look at him." Rachel turned to see Tommy struggling with the rifle setup again, his confidence completely shattered. The other recruits were openly watching now, some with sympathy, others with the kind of cruel amusement that comes from watching someone else's misery. "He's going to pass," Rachel said with quiet certainty. "He just needs to remember what he's been taught." "And what makes you so confident?" Webb asked mockingly. Rachel looked directly at him, and for just a moment, something cold and dangerous flickered in her eyes. "Because I taught him." The comment hung in the air like a challenge. Webb stared at her, trying to figure out if she was bluffing or if there was something he was missing. Rodriguez was studying her more intently now, his trained eye picking up details that the younger lieutenant was overlooking. "You taught him to shoot?" Rodriguez asked. "I taught him to focus," Rachel replied. "The shooting is just mechanics." Webb scoffed. "Right. I'm sure you're quite the expert." Rachel's smile was barely visible, but it was there. "We'll see." As if summoned by her words, Tommy looked over at her again. This time, instead of desperation, Rachel saw something else in his eyes, a flicker of the determination that had driven him to pursue this dream in the first place. She gave him the slightest nod. Tommy took a deep breath, closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them again, his hands were steady. The next few minutes would determine everything. Tommy's transformation was subtle but unmistakable. His breathing slowed, his hands stopped shaking, and suddenly he was handling the Barrett rifle with the kind of precision that made the instructors take notice. Rachel watched from behind the barrier, her expression unchanged, but inside she felt a surge of pride mixed with something darker. "Wow, I'll be damned," Rodriguez murmured, genuinely impressed. Kid's got it in him after all. But Lieutenant Webb wasn't ready to admit he'd been wrong. One good setup doesn't mean anything. Wait until he has to actually hit something. Rachel's jaw tightened. She'd seen this before: people in power who couldn't handle being challenged, who would double down on their mistakes rather than admit they might have misjudged a situation. Webb was clearly one of those people. "Ma'am," came a new voice from behind her. "I need to see some identification." Rachel turned to find a security guard approaching, his hand resting casually on his radio. He was younger than Webb, probably in his mid-20s, with the kind of eager attitude that suggested he was looking forward to flexing his authority. "Officer Davis," Webb called out. "Perfect timing. This civilian is refusing to leave the premises." Davis looked Rachel up and down, clearly unimpressed by what he saw. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come with me." "On what grounds?" Rachel asked calmly. Trespassing. Failure to comply with lawful orders from base personnel." Davis was reciting from memory, clearly enjoying himself. "You can either come voluntarily, or I can place you under arrest." Rachel felt something cold settle in her stomach. This was exactly the kind of abuse of power that had made her leave the military in the first place, people using their authority to bully others simply because they could. The fact that it was happening while she was trying to support her brother made it even worse. "I haven't trespassed," Rachel replied quietly. "I'm in the designated observation area. I haven't interfered with any training. The lieutenant says otherwise," Davis shot back. "And on this base, his word carries more weight than yours." Rachel could feel the eyes of the recruits on her, could sense their mixture of curiosity and second-hand embarrassment. Most of them probably thought she was just another civilian who didn't understand her place. They had no idea what she'd sacrificed for the privilege of being dismissed by men who had never faced real danger. "This is ridiculous," she said, her voice still calm but carrying a new edge. "I came here to watch my brother's test. I haven't broken any rules." "You broke the rule when you refused to leave," Webb interjected. "This is a military installation. We don't have to tolerate disruptive civilians." "Disruptive?" Rachel's control slipped slightly. "I've been sitting quietly on a bench. The only disruption here is your ego." The words hung in the air like a slap. Webb's face went red, and several recruits exchanged glances. Even Rodriguez winced. "That's it," Webb snarled. "Davis, arrest her." "Wait," Rodriguez said quickly. "Maybe we should." "I said arrest her," Webb repeated, his voice carrying the kind of authority that didn't tolerate dissent. Davis stepped forward, reaching for his handcuffs. "Ma'am, turn around and put your hands behind your back." Rachel looked at Tommy, who had stopped mid-setup to stare at the scene unfolding. His face was pale, his newly found confidence crumbling, as he watched his sister being arrested for the crime of wanting to support him. "This is wrong," Tommy called out, his voice cracking. "She didn't do anything." "Focus on your weapon, recruit," Webb barked. "This doesn't concern you." But it did concern him, and everyone knew it. Rachel could see the hurt and confusion in her brother's eyes, could feel the weight of his disappointment. She'd come here to help him, and instead she was making everything worse. "Turn around," Davis repeated, his voice harder now. Rachel looked at him for a long moment, then slowly began to turn. As she did, her jacket shifted again, and this time the movement was more pronounced. The sleeve pulled back just enough to reveal a glimpse of something that made Rodriguez's eyes widen. It was a tattoo, but not just any tattoo. It was a series of underwater waves curling around a code that made Rodriguez's blood run cold. A 29V. "Wait," Rodriguez said sharply. "Stop." Davis paused, confused. "What?" Just wait a minute." Rodriguez stepped closer to Rachel, his eyes fixed on her arm. "Ma'am, I need to ask you something." Rachel looked at him, and for the first time since this confrontation began, she saw something other than dismissal in a uniform's eyes. She saw recognition. "What's your name?" Rodriguez asked quietly. "Rachel Vale." Rodriguez's face went pale. "Jesus Christ. What's going on?" Webb demanded. "Rodriguez, what's your problem?" But Rodriguez wasn't listening to him anymore. He was staring at Rachel like he was seeing a ghost, his mind racing through possibilities he'd never considered. "Ma'am," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Would you mind showing me that tattoo?" Rachel hesitated. She'd kept it hidden for years, had built a quiet life where no one knew who she'd been or what she'd done. But now, faced with arrest for the crime of caring about her brother, she realized that sometimes the past was the only weapon you had. Slowly, she pushed up her sleeve. The tattoo was small, but unmistakable, a series of black waves wrapping around the code E29V, rendered in the kind of precise detail that suggested it meant something important. Rodriguez stared at it for a long moment, then slowly began to back away. "Oh my God," he whispered. "You're her." "What are you talking about?" Webb demanded. But Rodriguez was already turning, his eyes scanning the training field until they found what he was looking for. Commander Reeves, you need to see this." Across the field, a man in his 50s with steel gray hair and the bearing of someone who had seen real combat looked up from his clipboard. Commander Alan Reeves had been reviewing training reports, but something in Rodriguez's voice made him drop everything and start walking over. "What's the situation, Sergeant?" Reeves asked as he approached. Rodriguez pointed at Rachel's tattoo with a shaking hand. "Sir, this is ... This is E29V." Commander Reeves froze mid-step. His eyes moved from Rodriguez to Rachel, then down to the tattoo on her arm. When he looked back up at her face, his expression had changed completely. "Oh my God," he breathed. "You're supposed to be classified." Rachel nodded slowly. "I am classified. That's why I'm not on any active rosters. But you're here. My brother's here. I came to watch him qualify." The entire training field had gone quiet. Even the recruits who had been mocking her minutes earlier were now staring in confusion, sensing that something significant was happening, but not understanding what. Commander Reeves looked at Tommy, who was still frozen beside his rifle. "Your brother is Tommy Vale?" "Yes, sir." "And you single quotes double quotes. Rachel Vale, call sign Echo 29 Victor." She paused, then added quietly, "Operation Silent Vortex." The words hit Commander Reeves like a physical blow. He staggered backward, his face going white. "You made that shot," he whispered. Rachel's expression didn't change. "I made several shots, in the rain, at 740 meters, with a crosswind." 743 meters, Rachel corrected quietly. "And yes, there was a crosswind." Commander Reeves turned to look at Lieutenant Webb, who was standing frozen in confusion. "Do you know who this woman is?" Webb shook his head. "She's the reason I'm alive," Reeves said, his voice carrying across the now silent training field. "She's the reason 6 of my men are alive." The revelation hit the assembled group like a bomb. Rachel Vale, the quiet woman they'd been about to arrest for trespassing, was a legend. And everything was about to change. Commander Reeves' words echoed across the training field like a gunshot. "Everyone cease fire. All training exercises are suspended immediately." The sudden command sent ripples of confusion through the ranks. Recruits looked up from their weapons, instructors paused mid-instruction, and even the support staff stopped what they were doing. In the space of 30 seconds, the entire facility had gone from active training to dead silence. Lieutenant Webb stood frozen, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and dawning horror as he began to understand the magnitude of his mistake. Officer Davis still had his handcuffs out, but his hands were shaking now. "Sir," Webb stammered, "I don't understand what's happening." Commander Reeves didn't take his eyes off Rachel. "What's happening, Lieutenant, is that you just tried to arrest one of the most decorated snipers in modern military history." The words hit the assembled group like a physical blow. Rachel shifted uncomfortably, clearly wishing she could disappear back into the anonymity she'd cultivated for years. "Ma'am," Commander Reeves said, his voice carrying a reverence that made everyone lean in closer. "Would you mind if I told them what happened?" Rachel looked at Tommy, who was staring at her with wide eyes. She'd never told him the full story, had never explained why she'd left the military so abruptly, or why she sometimes woke up in the middle of the night with her heart racing. "If you think it's necessary," she said quietly. Commander Reeves turned to address the entire training field. July 15th, 2012. My team was inserted into hostile territory for a reconnaissance mission. Intelligence said we had a clear extraction route. He paused, looking at each face in the crowd. We were wrong. The recruits listened with the kind of attention they'd never given to a classroom lecture. This wasn't theory. This was real combat, described by someone who had lived it. 30 minutes into the mission, we walked into a kill box. Enemy fighters on both sides of the canyon, elevated positions, perfect crossfire. We were trapped for 6 hours with no air support because of a thunderstorm, no satellite coverage because of the clouds. Command couldn't even confirm our position. He pointed to Rachel, who stood quietly with her arms crossed. She was stationed 2 kilometers away, providing overwatch for the extraction route. When she lost contact with us, she made a decision that military doctrine says is impossible. "What decision?" Tommy asked, his voice barely audible. She left her assigned position and moved to a location on a cliff face in the middle of a thunderstorm with enemy patrols below. From that position, she had to make shots that would challenge the best snipers in the world to rain, wind, and limited visibility. A young female recruit raised her hand tentatively. "How many shots?" "7 shots," Commander Reeves said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. 7 targets. 7 direct hits in conditions that would make most people unable to see their own hand in front of their face. Rachel finally spoke up. "I had good equipment and motivation." "Ma'am," the female recruit asked, "how did you know where to position yourself?" "I studied the terrain for 3 weeks before the mission. I knew every rock, every tree, every possible line of sight." Rachel paused, then admitted, "But the weather conditions were terrible. I could barely see the targets. Had to calculate wind speed by watching the rain patterns." Commander Reeves nodded. "What she's not telling you is that command later called it the most difficult series of shots in modern warfare. She saved our lives with shooting that bordered on the impossible." "Then why isn't she famous?" Tommy asked, his voice full of confusion and pride. "Because she refused to be," Commander Reeves explained. "After the operation, she requested immediate discharge. Said she never wanted to kill anyone again unless it was absolutely necessary." Lieutenant Webb, who had been standing in stunned silence, finally found his voice. "Mom, I owe you an apology. I had no idea." "You couldn't have known," Rachel interrupted. "But you could have shown basic respect for someone who wasn't causing any trouble." The rebuke was gentle but pointed. Webb's face burned with embarrassment as he realized how his behavior would look to his superiors. "Sir," Recruit Peterson, the same young man who had been making jokes about Rachel earlier, stepped forward. "I owe you an apology too, ma'am." I was completely out of line. Rachel looked at him for a long moment. "You were. But you're young, and you learned something today. Don't waste that lesson." Commander Reeves turned to the assembled crowd. "This is why we respect everyone who comes to this base. You never know who you're talking to, what they've sacrificed, or what they've seen." "Ma'am," a female trainee asked, "do you ever regret leaving?" "Never," Rachel said firmly. "I did what I was trained to do. I saved good people, and then I went home to live a normal life." "But you still have the tattoo," Commander Reeves observed. Rachel touched her arm gently. "Because I never want to, forget the weight of those decisions or the faces of the men I brought home." The commander turned to Tommy, who was still staring at his sister with new eyes. Your sister is a hero, son, in the truest sense of the word. Tommy looked at Rachel with a mixture of awe and confusion. Sis, I had no idea. That was the point, Rachel said with a small smile. Heroes don't need to announce themselves. But even as she said it, she knew that her quiet life was about to change dramatically. The cat was out of the bag now, and there would be consequences, some good, some difficult to navigate. Officer Davis, who had been standing frozen with his handcuffs still in his hand, finally seemed to realize how ridiculous he looked. He quickly put them away and took a step back. Ma'am, he said, his voice cracking slightly, I am so sorry. I had no idea. Rachel nodded. Just remember this. Feeling the next time you're tempted to judge someone based on appearances. Commander Reeves looked around at the assembled group. I want everyone to remember this moment. This is what humility looks like. This is what real service means. And this is why we never, ever assume we know someone's story based on how they look. Lieutenant Webb, his career prospects probably flashing before his eyes, stepped forward. Ma'am, is there anything I can do to make this right? Rachel looked at him for a long moment, then glanced at Tommy, who was still struggling with his rifle setup. Yes, actually, there is. She walked over to her brother and gently adjusted his position, left hand closer to the stock. Pull your shoulder back. Wind's coming from the right. Tommy nodded, his hand steady now for the first time all day. Like this? Perfect. Now breathe out halfway, hold it and squeeze gently. The rifle cracked, and 200 meters away, the target sprouted a perfect, whole dead center. Tommy stared at the target, then at his sister, then back at the target. I did it. You did it, Rachel confirmed. And you'll do it again, because now you know you can. Commander Reeves smiled. I think we can safely say that Recruit Vale has passed his qualification test. But Rachel knew this was just the beginning. Word of her presence would spread, and soon her carefully constructed quiet life would be turned upside down. The question was she ready for what came next? Word traveled fast on a military base, and within an hour of Rachel's identity being revealed, the training facility had transformed into something resembling a pilgrimage site. Off-duty personnel found excuses to walk past the range. Officers who had been buried in paperwork suddenly needed to check on training progress. Even the mess hall staff had migrated to the windows overlooking the field. Rachel sat on the same concrete bench where this had all started, watching Tommy work through his remaining qualification tests with newfound confidence. But she was acutely aware of the whispered conversations happening around her, the pointed looks, and the way people were starting to treat her like some kind of living legend. Ma'am, Commander Reeves approached, carrying a folder. I need to ask you something. Rachel looked up at him. What is it? Base Command wants to know if you'd be willing to speak with some of our senior staff. There are questions about your service record. Rachel's expression tightened. What kind? Oh, I have questions. The kind that come up when someone who's supposed to be classified shows up at a training exercise. Reeves sat down beside her. There are protocols for this sort of thing. I'm not active duty anymore, Rachel said quietly. I'm a civilian. I came to watch my brother's test. I understand that. But your presence here has created a situation that needs to be managed carefully. Rachel was quiet for a moment, watching Tommy nail another target. What aren't you telling me? Commander Reeves sighed. There's been some discussion about whether your appearance here was planned, whether you're working with someone or if this is part of some kind of operation. The accusation hit Rachel like a slap. You think I'm here under false pretenses? I don't think anything, Reeves said quickly. But there are people above my pay grade who are asking questions. Your record shows you were discharged, but the circumstances around Operation Silent Vortex were never fully documented in the regular files. Rachel felt a familiar anger building in her chest. So now I'm suspicious because I did my job too. Well, that's not what I'm saying. That's exactly what you're saying. Rachel stood up, her calm demeanor cracking slightly. I saved your life and the lives of your men. I asked for nothing in return except to be left alone. And now, because I showed up to support my brother, I'm being treated like a security threat? The conversation had attracted attention. Several recruits had stopped what they were doing to watch, and Lieutenant Webb was hovering nearby, clearly trying to decide whether to intervene. Ma'am, Commander Reeves stood as well. I'm trying to help you here. There are protocols. I know the protocols, Rachel interrupted. I helped write some of them. What I don't understand is why my presence at a public training exercise requires an investigation. Because you're not supposed to exist, came a new voice. Rachel turned to see a woman in her 40s approaching, wearing the uniform of a full colonel. She had the kind of bearing that suggested she was used to being the smartest person in the room and the most dangerous. Colonel Catherine Morgan. The woman introduced herself. Base intelligence. Rachel's blood ran cold. Base intelligence meant this had just escalated far beyond a simple misunderstanding. Colonel, Rachel said carefully. Ms. Vale, or should I say Echo 29 Victor? Morgan's smile was sharp as a blade. You've created quite a stir. I came to watch my brothers. Test, so you said. But you understand how this looks, don't you? A classified operative, presumed inactive, suddenly appears at a training facility. People start asking questions. Rachel felt the trap closing around her. What questions? Questions about where you've been for the past few years. What you've been doing, who you've been talking to. Morgan stepped closer. Questions about whether your discharge was as complete as our records suggest. Are you accusing me of something? I'm trying to understand why a woman who disappeared from all military records is suddenly comfortable revealing her identity in front of 24 witnesses. Rachel realized with growing horror that her decision to stand up for herself had backfired spectacularly. By revealing her identity, she'd opened herself up to exactly the kind of scrutiny she'd spent years avoiding. I revealed my identity because I was about to be arrested for trespassing, Rachel said, her voice steady despite the panic building in her chest. I wasn't planning to tell anyone anything. And yet here we are, Morgan replied. With half the base talking about the legendary sniper who took down 7 targets in a thunderstorm. Tommy had noticed the commotion and was walking over, his face creased with concern. Sis, what's going on? Nothing, Rachel said quickly. Just finishing up some questions, but Morgan wasn't done. Actually, we're just getting started. Ms. Vale, I'm going to need you to come with me for a more detailed conversation. Am I under arrest? You're being asked to cooperate with a security review. Voluntarily, of course. Rachel looked at Tommy, saw the confusion and fear in his eyes, and felt something break inside her chest. She'd come here to support him, and instead she was creating a situation that would overshadow his achievement forever. Fine, she said quietly. But I want it on record that I've done nothing wrong. Of course, Morgan said. These are just routine questions. But Rachel had heard that tone before. I'd seen that look in the eyes of people who believed they held all the cards. She was about to be put through a ringer, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. As Morgan led her away, Rachel looked back at Tommy one last time. He was standing frozen on the range, his rifle forgotten, watching. His sister being escorted away by military intelligence. Don't worry about me, she called out to him. Finish your test. Make me proud. But even as she said it, Rachel knew that everything had changed. Her quiet life was over, and she had no idea what was coming next. The only thing she was certain of was that the people who had dismissed her as an insignificant civilian were about to learn exactly how dangerous it was to back a trained killer into a corner. The interrogation room was exactly what Rachel had expected, windowless, sterile, with a metal table and uncomfortable chairs designed to make people want to leave as quickly as possible. She'd been in rooms like this before, on both sides of the table, and she knew all the tricks. Colonel Morgan sat across from her, flanked by a younger officer who had introduced himself as Captain James Park from Internal Affairs. Between them lay a file folder that looked disturbingly thick for someone who was supposed to have been discharged. From all military records. "Let's start with the basics," Morgan said, opening the folder. "According to our records, you were discharged from active duty in August 2012. 3 weeks after Operation Silent Vortex. That's correct. And since then, you've been living quietly in Sacramento, working at Mutual Insurance Group as a claims processor." Rachel's eyes narrowed. "You've been watching me. We keep tabs on all former classified personnel," Captain Park said, speaking for the first time. "It's standard protocol. For how long?" "That's not really your concern," Morgan replied smoothly. "What concerns us is the discrepancy between the person our surveillance has been tracking and the person who showed up here today." Rachel felt a chill run down her spine. "What discrepancy?" Morgan pulled out a series of photographs. "These were taken over the past 2 years. You going to work, grocery shopping, visiting your apartment's fitness center." She spread them across the table. "Notice anything?" Rachel studied the photos. They showed a woman who looked like her, but different somehow. Softer, less alert, moving through the world like someone who had never been trained to kill. "You've been performing," Morgan continued, "playing the role of a harmless civilian. So well that even our trained observers bought it, until today." "I wasn't performing anything," Rachel said quietly. "I was living my life. Were you?" Park leaned forward. "Because the woman in these photos doesn't move like a trained operative. She doesn't scan her surroundings, doesn't check for threats, doesn't maintain tactical awareness. But the woman who faced down Lieutenant Webb this morning, she was ready for a fight." Rachel realized with growing alarm that they were right. For years, she'd been consciously suppressing her training, forcing herself to move and act like a civilian. But when confronted with injustice, when protecting Tommy became necessary, all of that careful conditioning had fallen away. "You want to know what I think?" Morgan said, closing the folder. "I think you've been preparing for something. Staying under the radar, building a cover identity, waiting for the right moment." "The right moment for what?" "That's what we're trying to figure out." Morgan's voice was cold now. "See, Operation Silent Vortex wasn't just about saving Commander Reeves' team. It was about eliminating 7 high-value targets who were coordinating attacks against American forces. Your shots didn't just save 6 SEALs. They disrupted an entire enemy network." Rachel had known this, of course, but she tried not to think about the broader implications of what she'd done that day. "Those 7 targets had friends," Park continued. "Friends who might be very interested in finding the person responsible for their deaths. Friends who might be willing to pay well for information about Echo 29 Victor." The accusation hit Rachel like a physical blow. "You think I'm selling intelligence?" "We think you're a security risk who's been flying under the radar for too long," Morgan replied. "And your sudden appearance here, revealing your identity in front of dozens of witnesses, suggests that your period of hiding might be coming to an end." Rachel stared at them in disbelief. "I came to watch my brother's qualification test, that's all." "Your brother, who just happens to be pursuing the exact same career path that made you famous," Park observed. "Convenient timing." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means that recruiting happens in lots of ways," Morgan said. "Sometimes it's about money. Sometimes it's about ideology. And sometimes it's about family." The implication was clear, and Rachel felt her carefully controlled temper finally snap. "You think I'm trying to recruit my own brother? We think you're here for a reason that has nothing to do with family support," Morgan replied calmly. "And until we figure out what that reason is, you're not going anywhere." Rachel looked around the room, calculating distances and angles out of pure habit. "Am I under arrest?" "You're being held for questioning under the National Defense Authorization Act," Park said. "We can keep you here for up to 72 hours, without charging you with anything." "And after 72 hours?" Morgan smiled coldly. "After 72 hours, we'll decide whether you're a threat to national security. If you are, that 72 hours can become indefinite detention." Rachel felt the walls closing in around her. She'd spent years building a quiet life, staying out of trouble, avoiding exactly this kind of attention. And now, because she'd tried to protect her brother from bullying, she was being treated like a terrorist. "I want a lawyer," she said. "Lawyers are for criminals," Morgan replied. "You're not a criminal, are you, Miss Vale? You're just a concerned citizen helping us understand some inconsistencies in our records." Rachel realized with crystalline clarity that she was trapped. They could hold her indefinitely, destroy her carefully built civilian life, and ruin Tommy's career before it even started. All because she'd refused to back down from a power-hungry lieutenant. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They thought she was the same person who had left the military broken and traumatized 11 years ago. They thought a decade of civilian life had made her soft, compliant, willing to be pushed around by people who'd never faced real danger. They were about to learn otherwise. "Colonel Morgan," Rachel said quietly, "I think you should make a phone call." "To whom?" "To General Patricia Hayes at SOCOM. Tell her that Echo 29 Victor is being held on suspicion of treason, and ask her if she thinks that's a good idea." Morgan's confidence flickered slightly. "General Hayes is the person who authorized." "Operation Silent Vortex," Rachel interrupted. "The person who knows exactly why I was discharged and exactly what I've been doing since. The person who will be very interested to know that her personal guarantee of my anonymity has been violated by overzealous intelligence officers." Park shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, we're just following protocol. Your protocol, Rachel," said, her voice carrying a new edge, "is about to get you both reassigned to counting inventory at supply depots in Alaska." For the first time since the interrogation began, Morgan looked uncertain. "You're bluffing." Rachel smiled, and for just a moment, the harmless insurance processor disappeared entirely, replaced by someone much more dangerous. "Call her and find out." The room fell silent. Outside, Rachel could hear the distant sounds of the training facility continuing its work, oblivious to the drama playing out in this windowless room. Finally, Morgan reached for her phone. Everything was about to change again. Colonel Morgan stared at her phone for a long moment before dialing. Rachel could see the doubt creeping into her expression, the first crack in the confidence that had carried her through the interrogation. Captain Park looked like he was starting to sweat. "General Hayes' office," came a crisp voice through the speakerphone. "This is Colonel Catherine Morgan, Base Intelligence at Naval Training, Facility San Diego. I need to speak with General Hayes immediately regarding a classified personnel matter." "One moment, Colonel." The wait felt eternal. Rachel sat quietly, her hands folded on the metal table, but there was something different about her posture now. The harmless civilian mask had slipped away entirely, replaced by the kind of stillness that preceded violence. "Colonel Morgan." The voice that came through the speaker was sharp, authoritative, and unmistakably displeased. "You have 30 seconds to explain why you're calling me about classified personnel matters on an unsecured line." Morgan glanced at Rachel, then back at the phone. "Ma'am, we have a situation involving former Petty Officer First Class Rachel Vale, service designation Echo 29 Victor." The silence that followed was deafening. Where is she? General Hayes' voice had gone deadly quiet. She's here, ma'am. In custody for questioning. In custody for what? Morgan swallowed hard. Security review, ma'am. She appeared at a training exercise and revealed her identity to multiple witnesses. We had concerns about... You had concerns? The general's voice could have cut steel. About what exactly? About why a classified operative would suddenly surface after years of maintaining a civilian cover. Another long silence. Colonel Morgan, I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you. Echo 29 Victor is under my personal protection. Her civilian status is not a cover, it's a guarantee. I made to her after she completed one of the most difficult operations in modern military history. She saved the lives of 6 Navy SEALs and disrupted a major enemy network, then asked for only one thing in return. What was that, ma'am? To be left alone. The general's voice was ice cold now. To live a quiet civilian life without interference. From people like you. Captain Park had gone pale. Morgan was staring at the phone like it might explode. Ma'am, Morgan tried again. She revealed her identity in front of... Did it occur to you to ask why? General Hayes interrupted. Did. You bothered to find out what circumstances led to that revelation before you decided to treat her like a security threat. Rachel spoke for the first time since the call began. They were about to arrest me for refusing to leave my brother's qualification test. Rachel? General Hayes' voice immediately warmed. Are you all right? I'm fine, General. Though I'm getting a little tired of being treated like a criminal for wanting to support my family. Who was about to arrest you? Lieutenant Webb and Security Officer Davis, for trespassing and failure to comply with lawful orders. The general's laugh was bitter. Trespassing. At a public training exercise, while watching her brother's test. Her voice hardened again. Colonel Morgan, are you beginning to understand the magnitude of your mistake? Morgan looked sick. Ma'am, we were following standard protocol for classified personnel. Rachel Vale is not classified personnel. General Hayes snapped. She's a civilian who happens to have classified knowledge. There's a difference, and if you don't understand that difference, you have no business working in intelligence. General, Park spoke up hesitantly. What are our instructions regarding Miss Vale? Your instructions are to apologize for wasting her time, thank her for her service, and never bother her again unless she commits an actual crime. Which, for the record, supporting her brother at his qualification test is not. Rachel felt a weight lifting off her shoulders that she hadn't even realized was there. General Hayes had kept her word, even after all these years. Ma'am, Morgan said, her voice much smaller now. What about the security concerns? She revealed her identity. To multiple witnesses. So what? General Hayes replied. She's not hiding from anyone. She's living a quiet life because that's what she chose to do after completing an impossible mission with perfect execution. If some overzealous officers forced her to reveal her identity to protect herself from harassment, that's your problem, not hers. Rachel looked at Morgan, whose face had gone from confident to humiliated. General, are there any restrictions on my movements or activities? None whatsoever. You're a free citizen who's earned the right to live your life however you choose. General Hayes paused. Though I would appreciate a call sometime. It's been too long. Yes, ma'am. I'll do that. Colonel Morgan, the general's voice had taken on an ominous tone. I'll be speaking with your commanding officer about this incident. I suggest you use the time before that conversation to think very carefully about how you want to explain your actions. The line went dead. The room fell into complete silence. Morgan stared at the phone like it had personally betrayed her. Park was studying his hands as if they held the secrets of the universe. Wow, Rachel said quietly, standing up from her chair. I think that concludes our interview. Morgan looked up at her, and Rachel could see the realization dawning in her eyes. She just destroyed her own career by harassing someone under the personal protection of a 4-star general. "Miss Vale," Morgan said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I apologize. We were overzealous." Rachel studied her for a moment. "You were scared. I understand that. But you let fear turn into suspicion, and suspicion into harassment. That's how good people get hurt." She walked to the door, then paused and looked back. "For what it's worth, Colonel, I really did just come to watch my brother's test. Everything that happened after that was because people decided I didn't belong somewhere I had every right to be." She opened the door and stepped into the hallway, where Commander Reeves was waiting with an expression of profound relief. "Miss Vale, I am so sorry about all this. If there's anything we can do, there is," Rachel said. "My brother should be finishing his qualification test soon. I'd like to be there when he does, of course. And ma'am, for what it's worth, I never doubted you." Rachel smiled. "I know. Thank you." As they walked back toward the training field, Rachel could see Tommy in the distance, working through his final exercises. He looked confident now, focused, like he'd found something in himself that had been there all along. She'd come here to support him, and despite everything that had happened, that's exactly what she was going to do. But she knew word of this incident would spread. Her quiet life was probably over, and she'd have to figure out what came next. For now, though, she just wanted to watch her little brother become a Navy SEAL. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the training field as Tommy lined up his final shot. Rachel stood behind the barrier in the same spot where this whole ordeal had begun, but everything had changed. The recruits who had mocked her earlier now watched her with something approaching reverence. The instructors who had dismissed her treated her with careful respect. Even Lieutenant Webb had approached her with a stammering apology that she'd accepted with more grace than he deserved. Tommy's hands were steady as he adjusted his position behind the Barrett rifle. 6 hours ago, he'd been shaking so badly he could barely hold the weapon. Now he moved with the kind of confidence that came from knowing he belonged here. "Breathe out halfway. Hold it, squeeze gently," Rachel murmured, too quietly for anyone else to hear. The rifle cracked, and 300 meters away, the target sprouted a perfect hole in the center ring. "Outstanding," Sergeant Rodriguez called. "Out. Recruit Vale, you have successfully completed your sniper qualification test." Tommy set down the rifle and turned to look at his sister, his face splitting into the biggest grin Rachel had seen since he was a kid. She felt tears prick at her eyes, proud tears, relieved tears, and tears for the innocence they both lost along the way. Commander Reeves approached with a clipboard and an expression of satisfaction. "Recruit Vale, you've scored in the top 10% of all qualifying candidates this year. Your sister should be very proud." "I am," Rachel said simply. Tommy jogged over to the barrier, still grinning. "Sis, did you see that last shot?" "I saw all of them." "You did good, Tommy. Really good. I couldn't have done it without you." His expression grew serious. "I heard what happened earlier, about the questions and everything. Are you okay?" Rachel glanced around at the dispersing crowd of recruits and instructors. "I'm fine. But things might be a little different for me now." "Different how?" "Quieter life might not be so quiet anymore." Rachel shrugged. "I'll figure it out." As they walked toward the parking lot, Tommy was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he asked, "Will you tell me about it? About what you did?" Rachel considered this. She'd kept the details locked away for so long, but watching Tommy's courage today had reminded her that some stories needed to be told. "Someday," she said, "when you're ready to hear it." "I think I'm ready now." Rachel looked at her brother, no longer the scared kid who'd needed her to run alongside his bike, but not yet the seasoned warrior he would become. "Ask me again after you graduate SEAL training." If you still want to know, then I'll tell you everything. They reached Rachel's car, and she paused with her hand on the door handle. Something was bothering her, a loose thread that needed to be tied up. Tommy, there's something I need you to understand about what happened today. What's that? When Lieutenant Webb and the others were giving you a hard time, dismissing you, making you doubt yourself, that wasn't about your skills or your potential. That was about their insecurity. Tommy nodded slowly. I get that now. Good. Because you're going to meet more people like that. People who use their authority to make others feel small. Don't let them break you down. I won't, Tommy said with conviction. I learned something today, too. What's that? That sometimes the most important person in the room is the one everyone's ignoring. Rachel smiled. You're going to make a good SEAL, Tommy. As she drove away from the base, Rachel's phone buzzed with a text message. She pulled over to read it safely. It was from a number she didn't recognize. Ms. Vale, this is Captain Rodriguez. I wanted you to know that Lieutenant Webb has been reassigned to administrative duties pending a review of his conduct. What happened today won't happen to other families. Thank you for standing your ground. A second message came through, this one from Commander Reeves. The training staff voted unanimously to add a new policy to our family observation guidelines. It's being called the Vale Protocol. Families of recruits will be treated with respect and courtesy. Period. Thank you for reminding us who we serve. Rachel stared at the messages for a long moment, then started typing a response. Thank you for doing the right thing. That's all any of us can do. 3 months later, Rachel was working late at the insurance office when her phone rang. The caller ID showed Tommy's number. Hey, she answered. How's training going? Sis, you're not going to believe this. Tommy's voice was excited, breathless. I just finished Hell Week. I'm officially a SEAL candidate. That's wonderful. I'm proud of you, but that's not why I'm calling. Tommy paused. I met someone today, another instructor. He said he knew you. Rachel felt her stomach tighten. Who? Chief Petty Officer Marcus Johnson. He said he was part of Commander Reeves' team in Afghanistan, one of the 6 men she'd saved. Rachel closed her eyes, seeing his face in her memory younger then. Scared, pinned down in that canyon. He wanted me to give you a message. Tommy continued. What message? He said to tell you that his daughter just started kindergarten. Her name is Rachel. The words hit her like a physical blow. Rachel had to sit down, her hands shaking as she held the phone. Sis, you still there? I'm here, she managed. He said there are others too, the guys you saved. They all have kids now, and they tell them stories about the guardian angel who brought their daddies home. Rachel wiped at her eyes, surprised to find them wet. Tommy, I know you didn't want recognition. I know you just wanted to be left alone. But I thought you should know that what you did mattered. It's still mattering every single day. After she hung up, Rachel sat in her quiet office, surrounded by insurance files and the mundane details of civilian life. But for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was hiding from her past. She felt like she was finally ready to make peace with it. The next morning, she called General Hayes. I was wondering when I'd hear from you, the general said without preamble. I'm ready, Rachel said simply. Ready for what? To stop running from who I used to be. I don't know what that looks like yet, but I'm ready to figure it out. General Hayes was quiet for a moment. There's a program I've been working on, teaching advanced marksmanship to special operations candidates. It's all stateside, all training. No combat operations. Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you a chance to pass on what you know, to make sure the next generation of warriors is ready for whatever they might face. Rachel looked out her office window at the busy street below, at all the ordinary people living ordinary lives because others had chosen to face extraordinary dangers. When do I start? 6 months later, Rachel stood on a different training field, watching a new group of candidates struggle with their weapons. But this time, she wasn't hiding in the observation area. She was standing front and center, wearing instructor credentials and the kind of respect that had to be earned. Left hand closer to the stock, she called out to a struggling candidate, "Pull your shoulder back. Wind's coming from the right." The young woman adjusted her position, took a breath, and squeezed the trigger. The target sprouted a hole dead center. "Outstanding," Rachel said. "Who's next?" As the training day continued, Rachel felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Purpose. She was still Rachel Vale, still the woman who had made impossible shots in impossible conditions. But now she was also Instructor Vale, passing on hard-won knowledge to the next generation of protectors. Tommy had been right. What she'd done still mattered every single day. And now she was making sure it would matter for years to come. At the end of the day, as the candidates dispersed, Rachel found herself alone on the range. She pulled out her phone and typed a message to Tommy, who was now deployed with his SEAL team somewhere she couldn't know about. "I wanted you to know," she wrote, "that coming to watch your qualification test was the best decision I ever made. Not because of what happened to me, but because I got to see you become the man I always knew you could be. I'm proud of you. Little brother, stay safe." His reply came back quickly. "I'm proud of you too, sis. Thanks for showing me that heroes don't always look like heroes." Rachel smiled, slipped her phone back into her pocket, and walked off the range into the sunset. She had a new group of candidates to train tomorrow, and she intended to make sure they were ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. After all, that's what guardian angels were for. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.